Hello everyone, my name is Diana Delrio and I am the current executive intern for the Office of Student Affairs. I'm here with Andrew Wayne, who graduated from Fisher in 2010 with a bachelor's in economics and history while interning at the Washington Center program. After graduating, Andrew found his passion in politics and began volunteering for current Congressman Tom Reed in 2010. Later, Andrew took a formal position in Reed's team as Chief of Staff, where he worked at the U.S. Capitol until 2020. Currently, Andrew is the Director of Tax, Trade, and Foreign Policies for Siemens, a German multinational company, where he advocates for his business interests to Congress and other government agencies, and where he advises his business leadership on policy changes that may create risk or opportunities for the company. So thank you so much, Andrew, for taking the time to meet with me today.
Thank you, Diane. I'm happy to be here.
Can you please tell us your career path that you have taken to get to where you are today and when you realized what your passion was?
Absolutely. And my story must, of course, involve my experience at St. John Fisher. And I can actually pinpoint the exact moment when my career path opened up for me and my opportunities post my graduation would come to full fruition. And it was in a meeting with my advisor, Dr. Monica Cherry, where it was recommended that I engage with the Washington Center. She was the faculty liaison. She showed me the pamphlet. I was a little bit uncertain, but I remember her encouraging words to get out in the real world, see what it's really like out there, and go make something of yourself. You'll like DC. And boy, she couldn't have been more right. The Washington Center was an incredible experience, an incredible program full of kind of young and exciting undergraduate students that were placed all over the federal government or in advocacy institutions across Washington, D.C., where I landed my internship at a small boutique lobby shop with some small clients. And really that gave me not only the opportunity to learn and understand the workings of a professional environment, but gave me an exposure to the U.S. Congress that I'll never forget. And because it was such a small shop, the interns and my colleagues as interns were provided a lot of experience to understand issues, understand effective advocacy and lobbying strategies, and were even sent to the Hill on a number of occasions to engage with congressional offices. And I can never forget just the kind of awe of stopping into a congressional office and see it kind of humming and working, and it just developed this imagery in my head of the Capitol as this bee's nest and constantly buzzing, and it drew this allure to me, and it will culminate it was actually St. Patrick's Day of 2010. It's a tradition for the Speaker of the House to host a lunch with the sitting president and with the Prime Minister of Ireland on St. Patrick's Day. And that was my first time seeing a sitting president. I saw President Obama walking up the steps from across the street. It was just a real touching experience, and you realized how close your government actually is to you. When some think it seems so far and so unresponsive, how open and engaging it actually is. And it just drew me to want to be on the inside of the Hill and on the inside of Congress. And so when I graduated, I was still in Washington, D.C. I was living with my uncle, trying to figure out, how do I get on the Hill? What are the steps I need to take? And I would know now much better how I would go about it, but I was eventually afforded a great opportunity to engage with Tom Reed's campaign when he was first running for Congress in 2010. And so I actually packed up from DC and moved back to where I grew up in Fairport to volunteer for Tom's campaign. He had a small office in Pittsburgh, right in the village there, that I would ride my bike to a few days a week to help open mail, answer the phones, canvass, and I learned a lot from the team there as to how to engage, what public service was about, how to campaign to, what do people respond to. And I had a great experience in organizing an event for who was then the minority leader, but would be speaker within a few months, John Boehner, who came to Rochester to support Tom. And we had an event at one of the local hotels and restaurants in the area. And I'm pretty sure that's kind of what gave me my little bit of leg up when the congressman was elected in 2010. It was only a couple of weeks before his team asked me to join him. And I actually came down to DC on November 15th, which was my first day in the US Congress. And from there, the succeeding 9.5 or so years were filled with incredible experiences in rooms that I never thought that I would be a part of, in discussions about such important policy matters that we were having in this office. And I started as an entry-level staffer known as a legislative correspondent, handling our constituent mail program and really understanding what our constituents, 717,000 New Yorkers, care about in their day-to-day life. And you really get an appreciation for what our people do care about. And then having to respond to them and engage in that sort of direct communication with our constituents, I saw how valuable that was. But it was also a very challenging task. But I knew if I worked hard enough, I could elevate into having a more policy-focused role. And so I started working on agriculture policy, which was important to our district, and energy and environment policy, eventually some social welfare policy that supported our work on the Ways and Means Committee. And then as I grew and gained opportunities, eventually working on trade policy and healthcare policy and tax policy, as the congressman is still a member of the Ways and Means Committee, which by most accounts is the most powerful committee in Congress and the only committee that's mentioned in the United States Constitution. So in 2017, there were a lot of changes happening in Washington, D.C. We had a new administration, we had a new majority in the Senate that was starting to be familiar, and so Congress was really focused on legislating, but there were a lot of changes going on at that time, and I was starting to consider maybe this path had worn itself out, and I needed to start finding another opportunity. There was a lot of pressure, not just on the job, but from the public. The discourse was starting to get very negative, and I'm not sure that that part has really changed, but as an office, we changed, and we started focusing more on what we can solve with our colleagues in Congress, rather than just wait to hear about a position from the leadership of a political party. Really take ownership of the policy solutions that Americans are really asking for and need, work with members across the aisle. And we established what's known now as the Problem Solvers Caucus, which is a group of now over 50 members of Congress, equally divided between parties, of which my boss was the chairman, with his counterpart, Josh Gottheimer, in New Jersey, and really established a forum for communication and relationship building, and most importantly, trust amongst members of Congress, between Democrats and Republicans, so they could really get to the meat and find the real solutions. If you can't trust the person across the table from you, how can you expect to work with them? And so we instituted a rigorous meeting agenda, brought in great speakers from the administration, C-suites of businesses, real big thinkers, and notable people in the political and policy arena. And we drew a lot of attention. We drew a lot of criticism. We drew a lot of support as well. And that was the real moment that kept me going in Congress, because we found something that was important, that we knew for the sake of the country was important, and worked through the caucus to find some solutions, whether it be healthcare, infrastructure, education, immigration, that we thought were going to help solve for the questions that the American people were asking Congress to solve for. And so in October of 2010, I became Tom's chief of staff. So from that point, in charge of the whole office and operation, from both the campaign to the official office, and really being the support to the congressman in carrying out all of his priorities. And so that was an incredible experience, an incredible learning opportunity. I was still able to stay heavily engaged with the Problem Solvers Caucus. I was able to identify and grow new staff coming to the Hill and put them in positions to be successful, ultimately to put the congressman in a position of success as we represented our constituents. And so I learned a lot through that process. But after 10 years, I was starting to get a little weary, but also still thirsty for more knowledge, more information, and then continued education. And I started really looking at who are great corporate entities that I can learn from, that not only can I provide a service to, but also that I can learn how they make decisions, how they look at trends in the economy. And one, ultimately that was important to me that would have a positive reputation that I would feel good about representing in my conversations with lawmakers, with policymakers, or even with you, Diana, in this interview today. And I was very fortunate to have an opportunity to join the team at Siemens, where I am now on their government affairs team as director for their tax, trade, and foreign policy agenda, and really engaging on identifying solutions for growing the American economy, for helping this digitalization movement amongst manufacturing and industry and governments as a whole to create more efficiencies, to tackle the tough problems of climate change in the environment, and to tackle the tough problems of the advanced technology economies that we're seeing growing all over the world and in America. Siemens is a fantastic company, has been in America for over 160 years, and has been committed since then to providing services that the American economy needs. And so I'm excited to be here with you today, Diana, and excited to be engaged just with my my friends at St. John Fisher, because it's been a while since I've been there.
Thank you for sharing. My next question is, out of all the rewarding experiences that you mentioned, especially while working in Congress, what is the best rewarding experience that you have had in your career?
I've got a couple. I would say my work with the Problem Solvers Caucus still has lasting rewards to me. I'm still a big cheerleader for them. I still pay attention to their meetings and engagement from the outside now, and just hope that they are carrying on and watching them carry on and build upon some of the foundations that I was fortunate enough to be able to begin. But I would say one moment that really sticks out to me is, I want to say it's January of 2015. We had been working for years. The congressman is the co-chair of the Congressional Diabetes Caucus. It's a very personal issue to him. His son is a type 1 diabetic. It's a big issue across a lot of the country. And so he was a leader in Congress in identifying what solutions from a policy standpoint would help support the medical treatments necessary. And one of the growing technology areas in addressing diabetes is the idea of an artificial pancreas. But a key component to development of the artificial pancreas is a continuous glucose monitor, a medical device embedded to track and monitor glucose levels within the body. Well, there are certain incentives and disincentives that the federal government provides to the industry, but one of the most clear incentives that it can provide in the healthcare arena is to expand Medicare coverage. What we were finding is that private insurance could cover, most of them would cover your continuous glucose monitor, but once you aged into Medicare, you were going to lose that coverage. Medicare wasn't going to cover the continuous glucose monitor. Not only did we think that was unfair and that was going to be a gap and a real detriment to people's healthcare, but we thought that Medicare coverage would also provide that little jolt of incentive to industry to keep the innovation train rolling, to keep moving towards that eventual artificial pancreas and ultimately cure of the disease. And so we led a congressional effort, first through legislation, but then ultimately to the administration to advocate for coverage of the continuous glucose monitor. All along the way, we were told it's going to be too expensive. We care about X, Y, and Z issue right now. We need to see more support. Well, okay, we took that. We brought on more support. We offered opportunities to pay for it, but ultimately the decision was made. I think it was January of 2015. To extend the coverage to the continuous glucose monitor. And I won't forget that day. It was an incredible feeling to know how many tens of millions of Americans that was going to help immediately, but also how many millions of Americans that would help in the future too. And really that goes to why I went to Congress to begin with, was to help my friends and neighbors and family and countrymen to get to live a better life. And that was just you don't get so many finite examples of that in Congress. A lot of it is pushing the rock uphill, but it was kind of the bookend to a great project. And I still have the letter that the congressman wrote me that day that it was covered, a handwritten letter framed behind my desk as well, just because it was that important.
As a political science major who is unsure about what to do after college, I really like that Congress seems to have a diversity of projects that you can be involved in, such as creating committees, as well as being a part of committees that have to do with issues such as diabetes. So thank you for sharing that with me. In contrast to my previous question, what has been the most difficult experience that you have had in your career, or the most challenging aspect of your career?
Oh, that's always a good question. I think the challenge of I'll approach this from two ways. There's the challenge of engaging with your constituency amidst all of the what the media is saying, or what your political opponents are saying, or even your political supporters are saying, and engage in kind of that forthrightness of that. No, we're here as a service, not as a political entity. We're here as a service to you, and trying to overcome some of the distrust and impressions that the public has of Congress and of their elected officials. I mean, Congress historically is around an 11 to 15% approval rating. That's not very good. And not to say some of that isn't warranted by what we see over on Capitol Hill, but overcoming that and making and helping our constituents realize how much we can do to help. I mean, we don't care if you vote for us. That was never a part of the equation. If you had a problem with getting your veterans disability benefit, your Social Security check, your passport, your immigration papers, I mean, the list of areas where we were there just to provide a support and help our constituents navigate the federal bureaucracy, that was always hard to overcome. And we can only do it by being good at it, by using our successes to help beget more success. So people would say, hey, no, call Tom Reed's office. He helped me with my Social Security check. I never thought it would happen. And in building that little bit of trust with our constituents as well. So they knew Tom not just as a face on TV or a name on a ballot, but as a human, as a person. And that's why he engaged in so many town halls, because he wanted to meet people face to face and hear directly from them about what the issues that they were facing are. And so, it's a slow retail process, but the rewards are incredible once they do pay off, because people started to really feel like they knew Tom, that they knew our office as well, and knew that we were there for them no matter what they thought, what their political leanings were. That was just never a consideration, but it's a difficult thing to overcome. And then I think another challenge is there's not a lot of support in Congress. I want to say this the right way. Staff are small, especially in House offices. I covered a lot of issues. My staff covered a lot of issues. Tom covered a lot of issues. And you could never be an expert on anything. You just had to know enough and know who to call to build these coalitions or to build a policy response. And I think that's a lot of times underlooked when there's a public perception that elected officials or public servants are paid too much or they have cushy jobs. That may be the case some places. In Congress, that's not the case at all. These are hard workers. They're only there for their love of the country, whether they're Democrats, Republicans, independents, whether they're 20 or they're 40. They're there because they care. And if they don't care, trust me, they quickly find a different occupation, because if you don't care, it's not worth it. And there's a perception there, but it's also a challenge, an institutional challenge in affecting policy in a positive way. If you don't have the resources to know about an issue and to carry out, this issue versus the thousands of other priorities that land on your lap every week, I think that's a challenge that a lot of people, people in DC understand it, but there's no solution to it yet that I've seen in really supporting congressional staff and giving them the resources that they need to carry out the needs of their constituents. Mm-hmm. That was a challenge.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. During your last year of working in Congress, a global pandemic happened. How has COVID impacted your career or the organization that you are associated with?
Yeah, that's a great question. It was unbelievable. First, the sheer weight of the pandemic set. They responded immaculately, but that was a question. You have this idea of you show up to the office and you do work at the office, then you go home, and within 2 days, that whole idea of mine was totally by the wayside. That team stepped up in ways I could have never asked for or even imagined. They were incredible, and they still are. But it was a pandemic. Our constituents were terrified. We didn't know what was going on. We're talking, the second half of March, early April. it was 15-hour days. It was nonstop talking to our health officials, talking to our public safety officials, talking to our constituents, trying to piece all of this information together to continue to provide that service. It was like, I once described it, that was everything we had done in the preceding 10 years on hyperdrive. We responded as well as we did because it was just an exaggerated example of what we always did, and that's represent our people, that's listen to our people, and that's deliver results for them. But it was scary at times. You didn't know what the next day was going to bring. How many more deaths would come? Would our hospitals run out of ventilators? Would they run out of beds? What if a natural disaster happens on top of this? There were so many scary things happening at that time, but our team responded, and now we've kind of established a little bit more of a normal to it as well. And Congress has shown that it can operate amidst these challenges, and in some ways can operate, in DC virtually while responding directly to their constituents. So I think it initially provided significant challenges to overcome, but ultimately those who stepped up to the plate, and I can say Tom did, came out the other side, not only of having responded correctly to their constituents' needs, but developed a new way of working and some new efficiencies, I think, even in how they carry out their duties.
So are the staff mostly virtual, or are they more in person now?
So every congressional office is kind of like its own small business. They all make decisions based on the needs of their office, based on the needs of their constituents. So I can say that people still do go into the Capitol, but it's all on an office by office basis. I know at the beginning of the pandemic, I made sure all of our staff were outfitted to work from home virtually. And it really depended. When Congress was in session, there would be more staff in general, and I'm speaking in general in Congress, not in our office specifically. So it's a combination of both.
I know that it has been a while since you graduated Fisher, but what was your favorite part of Fisher, and how has Fisher changed since you graduated?
Favorite part about Fisher was the quality of the instruction and the instructors and the size of the classes. I felt like I could get the attention when I asked for it and when I needed it. And that's everything from the history to the economics classes to the business classes that I took. I really felt like the quality of the instructors was very high. And I learned an incredible amount. I learned how to learn better at Fisher. And I think that was because of the class size and even the content of instruction. And I still look back on a history paper I wrote on President Kennedy's involvement in the ascension or in the increase of troops in Vietnam. And I got an A or an A- on it. But I look back at that as one of the best articles I've ever written. And so I have a lot of similarly fond memories about my education there and about the engagement with the faculty. How's it changed? I think I mentioned before when we got started, I try to take a drive by whenever I'm in Rochester to see what new has changed. The 6 years after I left, it seemed like it was a new building every year. But I think also this engagement opportunity I've noticed in the last couple of years in setting up the Cardinal Connection and even the Alumni Network in DC and some of the events that they held pre-pandemic, and just trying to build these connections and sinews among, we all have a like background because we went to Fisher. And so there's a connection point that you can make. And DC can be a tough place to build new relationships and make new social acquaintances outside of the working world. And I thought that was a really great service to offer to students. And in this sort of connection that we're having right now, it's something that I always wanted to be a part of once I left, because I didn't feel, and perhaps I didn't seek it as well, I take some responsibility, but I didn't feel like when I was making my steps into the working world that I had any guides on how to get a job on the Hill or what to do when you got there. I got there and I figured it out. But I think this is a great service to be able to provide some insights and speak from experience to a lot of folks that are going through Fisher and looking at similar opportunities.
My last question is, what advice would you offer me or other students at Fisher, in particular students who are unsure about what to do when they graduate?
Well, I'll kind of reiterate what Dr. Cherry told me. Go find something in the real world. It's an internship. Find something you enjoy, and find a real world application for it and see if it works for you. And that's the best way to get experience about what life's going to be like after Fisher. And if you can do that during your college time to test a couple of things out, I think that experience is unrivaled. And so I didn't know, it wasn't until almost the end of my collegiate career where I even really understood what I thought I wanted to do. And heck, I think I just said it wasn't until pretty much I almost graduated that I had figured out what I wanted to do. So don't put any pressure on yourself. Look to your strengths, talk to your advisors. They're smart, and look for what you think you're interested in, where your passions lie. Even if you don't think you can make a career of it, heck, an internship isn't making a career. It's about learning in the real world. It's about building that experience level, and maybe you find something along the way.
Thank you for the advice. I will definitely make a note out of it. Thank you, Andrew, for being here with me today and being a part of the Executive Intern Speaker Series project. It was very nice to meet you.
Thank you, Diana. I'm sure I'll see you in the halls of Congress in the next few years.
Hopefully. Fingers crossed.
All right.